I remember those days before everything fell apart like they belonged to someone else's life. For 6 years, Evelyn and I had been married, and from the outside, we looked almost perfect. We poured ourselves into that life, built a home with love and intention. Starting a family felt like the final, gleaming piece sliding into place. Sure, we had our strains. My job pulled me away for weeks at a time, and silence had started to settle in the spaces where intimacy used to live. But I believed in us. I believed we were strong enough. So when Evelyn told me she was pregnant, I lit up. Fatherhood felt like a second sunrise, something bright and anchoring. I dove in, picking names, painting the nursery, even switching jobs to be closer to home. For a while, it felt like we were walking a path carved just for us. But beneath the surface, something had already started to shift. The day our daughter was born was soft and glowing, like something lifted from a vintage photograph. Not flawless, but close. Evelyn lay cradling our newborn, her mother on one side, mine on the other, everyone beaming. Newborns aren't usually cute in the way people think, but to us, she was perfect. Her blotchy red skin mellowed to a warm pink, and the strange newborn angles of her face softened into something gentle and round. She was beautiful, and even then, I could see Evelyn in her. Evelyn nursed her naturally, effortlessly, as if those parenting classes had etched every lesson into her muscle memory. I stepped aside when a nurse entered, followed by a woman in business attire. "This is Ms. Rylance from administration," the nurse said, though her name tag was too far to read. "She's here to help with the birth certificate." It should have felt strange, filling out paperwork while a baby fed at her mother's chest, but it didn't. It all felt normal. Ms. Rylance smiled. "Take your time. Once you're ready, just fill in the highlighted parts. Most of it's already in our records, your names, ages, birthplaces. We'll send it off, and a copy will arrive in the mail in a couple weeks." Then she left. "Why don't you fill it out, Darius?" Evelyn asked, her voice light, her smile small. "I'm a little tied up." I didn't smile back. "No," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Maybe we should wait for the DNA results before I sign anything." It was like a record scratch, one of those jarring movie moments where time freezes. Gasps filled the room. Everyone stopped except the baby, who started to cry as her feeding was interrupted. Evelyn's mother broke the silence, voice sharp with disbelief. "Are you out of your mind? What are you saying?" Evelyn looked at me like I'd struck her. Her face twisted, first confusion, then anger. "You think this isn't your baby? After everything?" She tried to laugh, desperate for an out. "It's a joke, right? April Fools." But her body gave her away, shoulders rigid, breath caught in her chest. I didn't flinch. "No joke. I'm serious. There's a real chance I'm not the father." She stared at me, stunned. "How could you think I'd cheat on you? When have I ever?" "Typical," I cut in. "Deny, deny, deny. Your favorite trick, and you're doing it like a pro." I turned to her mother. "I'll move the car seat to your car. You should take them home. She might need help now, since I won't be around." I'd made it halfway to the door when my mother's voice sliced through the room. "Stop right there, Darius Monroe Whitner." It hit like a whip. I stopped cold, jaw clenched, turning back. The mothers were trading glances, tense, wide-eyed. Evelyn clutched our daughter to her chest, her sobs raw and rising. "No, you can't leave me," Evelyn cried, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "You can't leave me and baby Livia. She's your daughter. You're her father, Darius." I sighed, eyes heavy as I met her gaze. "I'm supposed to be, yeah? But being supposed to doesn't make it true, Evelyn. And you know that." Before she could speak, my mother stormed up and jabbed a finger into my chest, her patience shredded. With a grip that dragged me back to boyhood, she yanked me by the collar. Her eyes were blazing. "What is wrong with you, Darius? You were ecstatic when Evelyn told us she was pregnant. Remember? The baby books, the crib, the changing table. The nursery you painted pink and yellow, filled with animals. Every week, you brought home toys she wouldn't touch for years. So tell me, what changed?" Her voice demanded answers I wasn't sure I could give. "I had a revelation," I said. "I'm not as sure as I used to be. And I think you've noticed it too." Yvette nodded slowly, her face darkening. "Yeah, we noticed. You haven't touched Livia once. You won't even look at her. We thought maybe you were just overwhelmed, but now I'm not so sure." I straightened, voice low and even. "If she's mine, I'll be everything she needs." But I'm not bonding with a child who isn't mine. Not yours. Yvette snapped. What the hell are you even saying? If she's mine, I'll step up. If not, then Julian Rosewood can be a father to his own child. At that name, Evelyn's sobs halted, replaced by a sharp gasp. Julian? Are you serious? I've never been involved with him, Darius. You're insane if you believe that. I stepped toward her, close enough to see the panic blooming behind her eyes. My mother and Yvette exchanged tense, searching looks. Really, Evelyn? You're going to lie to my face? My voice dropped, low and cutting. You had an affair with him for 6 months. It ended when you found out you were pregnant. I know he told you to make sure I never found out. Her face drained of color. She shook her head, stammering. No, that's not. Who told you that? Julian would never. Her voice faltered. I leaned closer, nearly whispering. Julian Rosewood told me himself. And just like that, Evelyn slipped. Exhaustion and fear cracking her defenses. Julian would never tell you that. He promised. Yvette's eyes snapped to her daughter, then to me. She heard it too. Her face shifted, realization settling like a weight. I need to know exactly what you know, she said, her voice tight, commanding. I didn't look away. He confessed. All of it. Though to be fair, he was under pressure. Screaming, actually. The truth just came pouring out. That's a lie. Evelyn shot back, voice shaking. Julian was perfectly calm when he called me yesterday to check in on me and the baby. The room fell into a stunned silence, her words echoing like a sudden gunshot. No one moved. Yvette slumped back in her chair, stunned. My mother's mouth parted in disbelief, her eyes darting from Evelyn to me, silently putting the pieces together. So you're still talking to him? I asked, quiet but sharp. Is he still giving you advice on how to hide the fact that he might be Livia's real father? Evelyn broke. She crumbled into sobs so fierce that 2 nurses rushed into the room, eyes scanning the chaos. We were so careful, she wept, her shoulders trembling. There was no way you could have known, no one knew. She's just overwhelmed, I said quickly to the first nurse, who glared at me like I'd just shattered something sacred. We're discussing names for the birth certificate. I gave a thin, brittle smile. She seems to think I should write mine down. But I think it's better to wait until we know if I'm the father, or if it's the man she was seeing when she got pregnant. The nurse's stare lingered on me, cold and assessing. Then her eyes softened as she turned to Evelyn, gently resting a hand on her arm. Miss Whitner, let's calm down, okay? Remember your breathing techniques, she said, signaling to the other nurse. Ruby's going to grab something if you need it, but let's try natural first. Deep breaths. In with me now. As Evelyn struggled to inhale through the sobs, I didn't notice my mom and Yvette circling closer, until my mother's hiss snapped me to attention. You need to explain what's going on, she whispered, sharp and low. Startled, I turned to face her. She rarely raised her voice, but this was the second time today. That alone told me just how deep this had cut. I want the whole truth, Yvette said, her arms crossed, her eyes burning. The full story? What, when, how? Yvette's voice trembled. This is completely out of the blue. I let out a bitter laugh, eyes shifting between them. You're asking the wrong person, I said, the frustration rising like heat in my chest. I'm not the one sneaking around. I'm just the idiot left connecting the dots. I motioned toward Evelyn. She was seeing someone from work. While we were trying to start a family, while I was dreaming of cribs and lullabies, she was with at least one other man. Maybe more. Evelyn, still cradling her daughter, pulled herself together with unsettling speed. Her tears had dried, but her voice cracked with something sharper than sorrow. We were so careful, she whispered. How did you find out? My mother and Yvette both turned to me, hungry for answers. You were careful, I agreed. I'll give you that. I had no clue. Neither did anyone else. I let the silence stretch. But Julian, he just couldn't keep his mouth shut. Evelyn's brow tightened. What are you talking about? Julian was trying to impress Ruby Graves, I said, watching her face twist at the name. You remember Ruby, right? She's worked with you for years. Her husband, Scott, is one of our friends. Evelyn looked down, lips pressed tight. Well, Julian got close to Ruby. Too close. But Ruby didn't trust him, thought he was a liability. So to prove he could keep secrets, he started showing off. Told her stories. Names. Details. He talked about his flings at work, married women, single women. The one before you was Sandy. Her husband got suspicious, so she cut things off. I stepped closer. Then came you. 6 months, Evelyn. He said it ended when you got pregnant. You hoped I'd be the father, so you told him to keep quiet. To disappear. Stop it, Evelyn hissed, hands trembling on the bed rails. Oh, now you want it to stop. I laughed, the sound dry and jagged. You should have thought of that before sneaking around with Julian. He bragged, Evelyn. Said you asked him to stay quiet because you knew I'd leave you if I ever found out. The room went still. Yvette looked like she'd been slapped, and my mom stared at Evelyn in stunned disbelief. And Ruby, my mom asked. How did she end up spilling everything? She didn't mean to, I said with a humorless chuckle. Apparently, Ruby's loud. Not like Evelyn, but loud in other ways. I glanced at the mothers. She uses names. Very specific names. According to Scott, one night she screamed out, Give it to me, Julian. I love it. Yvette went pale. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, as if that could unhear the words. Scott recognized the name instantly. It's not like Julian sounds anything like Scott. He confronted her, and she cracked, told him everything. Every name. Every lie. He told me later over drinks. Said the moment he heard that name, he knew. Yvette turned to Evelyn, her voice low, wounded. Tell me it's not true. But Evelyn said nothing. Her eyes darted everywhere, but toward her mother. There's more, I said. After Evelyn, Julian moved on to marry Ridgefield. Her husband, Ethan, is in law enforcement. It's a whole different mess. Mary started staying late at work. Late for daycare pickups. Ethan noticed. He's been holding back, for Evelyn's sake, apparently. But now that the baby's born, he's not staying quiet. Yvette's face was white as paper. So you're telling me Julian Rosewood was sleeping with multiple women, including my daughter, and there's a real chance Livia is his? Yes, I said flatly. And Julian? He might know. Or maybe he doesn't care. A heavy silence followed, thick and suffocating. Everyone stood frozen in the wreckage of what they'd just heard. Finally, my mother broke the tension. So what now? I exhaled slowly, the weight of every moment pressing down on me. I already submitted a DNA test. Talked to the head nurse the day after the birth. Since we're married, I didn't need Evelyn's permission. I rubbed my hands together, jaw clenched. Paid extra to have it expedited. Results should come in any day now. 2 to 3 days, I said. Yvette shifted where she stood, her eyes flicking between Evelyn and me. Then, hesitantly, she asked, Do you think you could ever forgive her? Move on, even if you're not the baby's biological father. The change was subtle, but I caught it. She didn't call her Livia this time. Just the baby. Yvette had always used her name before. That small omission echoed louder than anything else. She was perceptive, always had been. And I could tell, despite everything, she was still clinging to the hope that I'd forgive Evelyn, that I'd stay. I glanced at my mom. She didn't say a word, but her silence told me she already knew exactly where I stood. She wasn't happy about it, but she understood. To be honest, I don't think I can, I admitted. Even if Livia is mine. My eyes found Evelyn's, but she looked away, ashamed. I've had just over a week to sit with this, I continued. And every second has been miserable. This wasn't a one-night mistake. It was a 6-month affair. Half a year of lies, of betrayal. She didn't just cheat on me. She broke everything we built. She risked getting pregnant by someone else while we were trying to have a baby together. I turned slightly, addressing both women now. She smiled in my face and told our families it was our decision to start a family, all while still sneaking around with Julian. Yvette's lips were pressed into a tight line, like she was holding back every emotion clawing at her throat. Have you thought about counseling? My mom offered, stepping in gently. I knew she was trying to keep the peace before things spiraled. Couples therapy might help you rebuild, slowly. And think of Livia. She's innocent in all of this. That little girl needs a father, Darius. You could still be that for her. I sighed and rubbed my face, feeling the weight of everything I hadn't said. Mom, therapy won't fix this. My voice came out sharper than I meant, and I saw her flinch. Honestly, I'm just trying to figure out what I did wrong. Where I failed. Something I missed, something that made her look elsewhere. I looked at Evelyn again, the ache in my chest tightening. She wasn't looking for love. She knew Julian wasn't going to give her anything real. He's a serial womanizer. Everyone knows it. So what was it? Thrill? Attention? A distraction? I shook my head, bitter. I'm trying not to unload all the anger I'm carrying, because frankly, Neither of them deserves it right now. But I'm close. So close. The words kept spilling, unfiltered. You can't imagine how shattered I've been. I was ready for this. I wanted this. I was so proud to become a dad. And then everything fell apart. Just gone. I exhaled, long and low. And honestly, I almost hope I'm not the father. Both women looked at me, stunned, silent. Because if I'm not, then maybe I won't have to deal with being a part-time parent. I don't know if I can survive being tethered to Evelyn for the next 18 years. If Livia is mine, I'll need therapy just to figure out how to exist in the same room as her mother. Just then, a nurse stepped out of the hospital room, her gaze finding mine. Mr. Whitner, she said gently, walking over. Your wife asked to speak with you. She knows you're still here, and since her mother hasn't returned, she figured you might be close. I nodded, but as I started to move, she raised a hand. If you go in, please try to stay calm. We want to avoid causing her stress. She's scheduled for discharge this afternoon, and additional medication could affect the baby. I know from your classes that you understand how important those early feeds are. Her words cut through the haze. She was speaking to me not as a husband, but as a potential father, someone who still had a duty, whether he wanted it or not. I nodded slowly. Maybe you should talk to her, my mom said softly. Yvette and I will get some coffee. Give us your keys. We'll move the car seat. She paused, then added gently. Before you go in, stop by the nursery. Take a good look at Livia. I think she looks a lot like you did when you were born. Wishful thinking, Mom. I muttered, barely meeting her gaze. Or maybe you're just seeing what you want to see. She didn't argue, just shrugged. But I knew. If Livia was mine, my mom would love her like oxygen. Nothing between Evelyn and me would change that. I stepped into the hospital room. The moment Evelyn saw me, she crumbled again, sobs breaking through her chest like a dam giving way. You must hate me, she choked. No, I said quietly, gripping the edge of the bed frame. That's the problem. I struggled to keep my voice steady. I hate what you did, I said, each word heavy with fire. I'm furious, so angry I can barely think straight. I exhaled slowly, fists clenched at my sides. But I don't hate you. I paused, trying to keep the storm inside from spilling out. So, do you really want to talk now? Or do you need a few more days to figure out how you're going to spin this? I don't need days, Evelyn started, but I didn't let her finish. You've had 9 months to think about what you'd say. If I ever found out about you and Julian Rosewood. The name hit like venom. Julian Rosewood. I repeated, slow and deliberate, letting the weight of it hang between us. I thought I was becoming a father. Our baby, not his. Evelyn's eyes locked onto mine, desperation swelling in her voice. It is your baby, she cried. I might be a lot of things, but I know who the father is. Do you? I snapped. Because I checked my work schedule. I was offshore during the first week of July. Most of it, anyway. I got home at the end of that week, and yeah, we were together immediately. That's when I thought it happened. That's what I told everyone at work. I stepped closer, gaze unrelenting. But what about the weeks before that, Evelyn? Did you have him over while I was gone? Did you sleep with him in our bed? My voice cracked with rage. Not that the location matters. What matters is that it happened. No, she shouted, tears streaming again. He never came to the house, only for work events. We were careful. I wouldn't risk a neighbor seeing. Careful, I echoed coldly. Just not careful enough to avoid getting pregnant. Evelyn dropped her face into her hands, sobbing. I don't know why I did it, she murmured. I was lonely. You were always gone. Julian and we started talking. Then it became more. I didn't mean for it to. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping. That was your solution to feeling lonely? That's what you chose. Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought she'd shut down completely. But I pressed on. So you cheated on me for 4 months, then kept it going after you got pregnant, for another 2? She nodded, ashamed. I suspected I was pregnant, but I didn't want to stop until I was sure. I told myself, if I was already pregnant, it didn't matter anymore. She winced as soon as the words left her lips. So Julian bailed when you told him? I asked, arms folded, voice low. She nodded again. Yeah, he didn't want to risk you finding out. Or being responsible if it was his. So you talked about this, planned your next move? I said, disgusted. Yes, she whispered. We figured you'd never question it. And honestly, there was a good chance she wasn't his. You were home that first week in July. We were together the whole time. I didn't see Julian once when you were back. I tilted my head, the weight of it all crashing down like a wave. So you had a full-blown relationship with Julian while I was offshore, working to support us. While I was out there, you were here, in someone else's bed. No, it wasn't like that, she said quickly. It wasn't emotional. It was just physical. I felt desire. I offered bitterly. Fire, she whispered. And Julian was there. Only when you weren't. We'd meet at his place, 3 or 4 times a week. I never stayed overnight. I tried to make it seem like I was home, like nothing had changed. She looked up at me, her voice lower. We were careful at work. No PDA. No flirting. We made sure no one could tell. It sounded rehearsed, like she'd gone over it in her mind 100 times. And no, she added, eyes flicking toward mine. He's not better. Not in bed. Not at anything. We didn't do anything you and I haven't done. I said nothing. He was just there when you weren't. It was fun. It was selfish. It wasn't revenge. It was for me. That truth landed like a slap. She didn't even try to soften it. I clenched my jaw, barely holding it together. If you were only mine when I was around, then you were never really mine at all. My eyes bore into hers. You were my wife. And his mistress. You were so careful. So quiet. Until you got pregnant. My voice grew colder. Did you ever think about what would happen if I found out? If our first child had a different blood type? Or didn't look like their siblings later on? Did you think I'd just swallow it? Just accept it? Or maybe you'd try again later with Julian and give him a second kid too, huh? I said, voice sharp as glass. No. Evelyn burst out, eyes wide with panic, shaking her head like she could physically erase what I'd just said. I swear, I promised myself I'd never cheat on you again. I knew once you bonded with Livia, you'd never leave. Even if she wasn't yours, biologically. She sniffled, wiping tears from her cheeks. Just look at how devoted you've been already. Even Julian noticed. Wow. I said, voice drenched in sarcasm. Points for me, huh? You and Julian talked about this. About how you'd string me along. Play me like a fool. That phone call yesterday. Was that just part of the game? Talking strategy? How to manage me? Her fingers twisted the blanket. Eyes flicked to the side. That look, I knew it. The face of someone caught, scrambling for a story that wouldn't make things worse. I stepped closer. Let me tell you something, I said coldly. The key word in everything you just said was. As in, I was invested in being Livia's father. But not anymore. Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but I was beyond caring. Both our moms noticed. I haven't held her. Haven't changed her diaper. Haven't even looked at her for more than a second. I leaned in, my voice sharp enough to cut. If the DNA test says she's mine, fine, I'll be her father. But until then, I'm done playing house with you. Tears poured down her face, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. Let me ask you something, Evelyn, I said slowly, eyes locked on hers. Did it ever really matter to you whether I was the father? She hesitated, didn't deny it. Her lips parted. Then, after a beat, she whispered, of course I wanted you to be the father. But once I knew I was pregnant, I just wanted the baby. I knew she'd be beautiful, and you wouldn't question anything. You and Julian, she swallowed. You don't look that different. Same hair, similar build. It would have worked. A hollow laugh escaped my chest. You know, I started working closer to home for you. I gave up offshore bonuses, took a pay cut, because I thought that's what you needed. I shook my head, fury simmering just under the surface. If me being away was the issue, all you had to do was say something. Just talk to me. She sobbed harder, but I was numb to it now. Well, that's about to change, I said. If I'm not the father, I'm going back offshore. I'll stay out there as long as I need to. And I'll find someone who actually wants me. Someone who honors her vows. Someone who can keep her legs closed while I'm away. Her cries grew louder, but I didn't flinch. I need you, she begged through tears. You have to help with the baby. We're a family. What about us? These past 7 months, I've been loyal. I haven't looked at another man. We could fix this. Counseling, maybe. We could fix it. Right now? I said coldly. There is no us. If the DNA test says I'm her father, we'll figure it out from there. But until then, I'm done. I looked around the room, eyes scanning the walls that used to mean something. I've already packed what matters. It's gone. Her eyes widened, voice trembling. Where will you go? I rented an apartment last week, I said, flat and emotionless. I waited until after Livia was born. But I'm gone now. I walked toward the door. Yvette's here. My mom too. They'll help. My mom's still clinging to hope that Livia's her grandchild. We'll see. I didn't look back. Her sobs followed me into the hallway. I nearly ran into Yvette and my mom outside the room. Clearly, they'd heard everything. Yvette's face was pale, her jaw clenched. Yeah, I heard you. So sue me, she muttered. She looked at me, her expression somewhere between desperation and shame. But don't give up yet, Darius. There's still a chance. Especially if Livia is your daughter. I turned toward her, tired of soft-pedaling the truth. Did you even listen, Yvette? Did you miss the part where Evelyn never actually apologized? Not once. Not really. I could feel the heat rising again. She didn't show guilt. No real remorse. She's been justifying it from the moment I walked in. Her reason? She was lonely. Aroused. And I'm supposed to just accept that and raise a child that might not even be mine. Disgust coated every word. My mom stepped in, trying to smooth things over. We moved the car seat and secured it, she said gently. I'm going to pack a bag. I'll stay here for a few days. She paused, her voice tender but edged with steel. Even if you're not the father, Evelyn's been like a daughter to me for 6 years. I can't abandon her. Not yet. She looked me straight in the eye. But don't think for a second that I condone what she did. I'm angry too. If she hadn't just had a baby, Yvette and I would be telling her exactly how foolish she's been. I nodded, appreciating my mom's honesty, and when they asked, I told them where I'd be staying. What I didn't say was that I'd already talked to a lawyer, already taken steps to protect what was mine. Credit card debt settled, investment accounts secured, divorce papers drafted, infidelity noted, even if the state didn't care. Evelyn would be stuck at home for a while, recovering. But I knew better than to assume she wouldn't meddle with the finances online. I wasn't about to let her burn down what little stability we had left. Truth was, I didn't believe there was anything left to save. Whatever lingering flicker of hope I had, that fragile tie to the happiness we once shared, it was gone. Trust was shattered, and without it, the rest was just rubble. On the drive to my new apartment, I called Scott. I needed a drink. I'd originally planned to take a few weeks off after the baby was born to help Evelyn adjust, play the supportive husband. But now, the last thing I wanted was to be alone. Scott had a flexible schedule, working for his father-in-law, so he met me at a quiet bar. His situation wasn't much brighter. After Ruby's confession, he'd been wrestling with the same dark questions I was. You talked to Evelyn? He asked once we'd sat down with our drinks. I nodded and laid it all out. Every ugly, unfiltered detail. He took a sip of his beer and said, I already talked to the same lawyer you did. He leaned back in his chair. Lucky for me, Ruby's dad made her sign a prenup. Wanted to protect his company. She's got stock, but no voting rights, no dividends. She'll keep it, but I get everything else. We'd had this conversation before. He knew Evelyn, and I didn't have a prenup. Everything we built together, which meant she was entitled to half. And she earned enough on her own that alimony wasn't guaranteed, but I still needed leverage. Yvette might unknowingly help with that. Child support only mattered if the baby was mine, and I still had serious doubts. I'm going to pay for this, I muttered, dragging a hand down my face. The courts are going to punish me for doing nothing wrong. Scott nodded grimly. Ron and I talked to Marcus Duval, Dana's husband. Told him everything about Julian. Man looked ready to break something. I shook my head. Can't blame him. He was mad at us, too, Scott said. Called us cowards for not going after Julian sooner. I raised an eyebrow. And Ron said. Scott grinned. Ron told him. Who said anything about letting him off easy? Then he told Marcus, just don't get yourself locked up over that clown. He's not worth jail time. I chuckled, the kind of laugh you use to mask the ache in your chest. Marcus might be hot-headed, but he's not dumb. Exactly, Scott said. He told us, fine. Then I'll just make sure I don't get caught. We laughed. That dark, broken laughter only betrayed men understand. Yeah, I said. We all know something has to happen to that idiot. But I've got to be careful. No rash moves. And castration's off the table. Scott raised an eyebrow. You've lost it. I smirked. Not entirely. If he loses both, he can still get hormone therapy. Still have a sex life. But leave him with one. Damage it just enough, and he'll live in constant discomfort. It's a slower punishment. Psychological. Lingering. Scott burst out laughing, shaking his head. You're dangerous when you've had time to think. Guess heartbreak brings out the creative side, I said, swirling the drink in my hand. We both sat there for a while, letting the silence settle. And deep down, we knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Man, I have to tell Ron and Marcus that one. Scott had laughed, still chuckling at my twisted theory of selective punishment. We'd needed that laugh, something dark and absurd to take the edge off. 2 days later, I pulled into the driveway of the house Evelyn and I used to share. The place didn't feel like mine anymore. Yvette opened the door, her expression hard, arms folded tightly across her chest. "You didn't waste any time, did you?" she muttered, suspicion plain in her voice. "What do you want?" "Evelyn got the divorce papers this morning," I said, the words heavy in my mouth. Guilt and relief churned in equal measure. Her face softened, but only a little. "She's been crying ever since. The only time she holds it together is when she's with Livia." "I can't blame her for being upset," I said. "But let's not pretend she didn't spend half a year turning me into a joke." Yvette's eyes narrowed. "Is there any chance for reconciliation? Maybe counseling could." I shook my head slowly. "There's nothing left to fix." I handed her a folded envelope. She glanced at it, puzzled, until recognition lit her face and her breath hitched. "Is this?" "Yeah," I said flatly. "The paternity test." Her hands trembled as she opened it. When she saw the result, her whole body sagged. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks as the truth washed over her. "I'm sorry, Yvette," I said, my voice quieter than it had been in days. She didn't speak, just pulled me into a hug, and I felt her grief shaking through her chest. "I'm sorry too," she whispered. Then she stepped back, wiped her eyes, and turned toward the hallway. She had to be the one to tell Evelyn. I'd already told my mom. She'd been just as crushed. She'd dreamed of holding her granddaughter, watching her grow, being part of that first chapter in a new generation. But that dream had been ripped away, and she was angry. Angry enough to refuse to be in the house while we waited on the DNA results. She'd felt the betrayal almost as personally as I had. And as all of this unraveled, word had started to spread. The town was buzzing about Julian Rosewood, about the affairs, the betrayals, the destruction he left behind. Scott, Ron, Marcus, and we didn't hold back. We called him out by name, told everyone who would listen. We didn't care about saving face anymore. We cared about truth. Julian's method was calculated, charming women who were hurting, slipping into the cracks of their marriages. And once we told our stories, others followed. We weren't the only ones. Fathers started demanding tests. More women were outed. 2 more kids were traced back to Julian within days. And then, just when things seemed like they couldn't get more surreal, Julian confessed. Directly. To the police. You'd expect a guy like him to have a backup plan. Liquid assets, offshore accounts, a quick way out. But no. Julian had gone all in on real estate and ego. Fancy house, expensive toys, gaudy decor. A boat, custom hunting gear, even rare art on the walls. If he'd had any sense, he would have cashed out and vanished. But he didn't. He stayed, which made him easy to find. A few days after his name lit up half the town, he was discovered on the sidewalk near his home, barely conscious, arms bound behind his back. A jogger found him early in the morning. She tried to help him up, but his screams stopped her cold. She called 911. Paramedics arrived and found the damage. His groin, crushed. Not bruised. Not broken. Crushed. The weapon? A 3-pound sledgehammer. Ron told me about it later that night at the bar, sitting next to Scott and Marcus, his voice casual. 2 detectives told me, he said with a half smile. If I ever had a 3-pound sledge with some mysterious tissue stuck to it, I should probably toss it into the swamp. He lifted his glass. Not that I know anything about that. Just passing along the message. He winked. We all got it. Julian claimed he didn't know who'd attacked him. Said someone rang his doorbell. Couldn't remember if it was night or early morning. Just that it was dark and he'd been half asleep. I think they used a taser, he told investigators. They shocked me down there a few times. I remember that. He thought there were 2 of them. Maybe more. He couldn't say for sure. But one voice rang out clear in his mind. Don't go after another man's wife. After that, it was only pain. Desperate to see his attackers brought to justice, Julian listed every woman he'd slept with over the years, married or not. The list was long. Too long. With that many potential suspects, the investigation became a mess. Nothing but dead ends and uncertainty. No hard evidence. No clear timeline. No way to lock down alibis. Privately, Ron told me, and Scott the detectives weren't losing sleep over it. They think Julian got exactly what he deserved, he said with a shrug. A few months later, the investigation went cold. Back home, Evelyn was awarded half of everything. We sold the house. A new family moved in, parents with a young daughter. I wondered if she liked the nursery I painted, the little animals I spent hours getting just right. Knowing some other man's child was growing up in the room I built for my own felt like a punch to the gut. Evelyn moved back in with her mom. At least she wouldn't be alone. I didn't care who she dated. She called once, probably on Yvette's orders, to say sorry. But she didn't say what she was apologizing for. Cheating? Lying? Getting caught? I didn't ask. When she suggested we meet to talk, I said no. When she asked if I had anything to do with what happened to Julian, I told her the truth. He got what he deserved. Then I hung up. That was the last time we spoke. Everything after that went through our lawyers. Sometimes I wondered how long she'd chase Julian for child support. Knowing him, he'd never pay a cent willingly. She'd eventually get something out of him, sure, but only after burning her savings to fight him in court. And he wasn't just facing her. Other women were filing suits too. I heard the courts froze his assets to stop him from liquidating. With medical bills, legal fees, and a mountain of obligations, he'd be lucky to keep the shirt on his back. And that's assuming he even kept his job. 18 months later, I stood on the lower deck of the Econ 626 oil rig, the autumn breeze brushing past me. My windbreaker kept the chill off, but it couldn't quiet the change inside me. It was one of my final visits. I'd met someone. Her name was Lily. She wasn't flashy. She was calm, grounded, steady as tide water. There was a quiet bond between us, something solid I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I didn't know where it was headed, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't looking back. I'd finally decided to take the desk job at headquarters, the one I'd turned down twice before. I was done running from ghosts. As I unzipped my jacket, I felt it hanging near my belt. A familiar weight, one I should have gotten rid of long ago. But I'd kept it, God knows why. The hammer. I'd carried it from house to apartment, from city to sea. It had become something twisted and symbolic, a token of pain, and, strangely, a piece of power. I pulled it from its hiding spot. It felt heavy, colder than I remembered. The metal bit into my palm as I stared out at the endless blue of the Gulf. Then, without another thought, I wound up and hurled it into the sea. The splash echoed faintly in the distance. And with it, something let go inside me. After I walked out of that hospital room years ago, everything blurred. My life felt distant, like I was just watching it happen from somewhere else. I rented a bare little apartment near the house Evelyn and I once called home. No decorations, no warmth, just four walls and silence. If I wasn't offshore, I was at the bar, nursing beers and broken memories, replaying everything, wondering how I missed the signs. Were we ever really happy? Or had I just believed in a lie? I thought about seeing Livia. My mom asked often, "Have you gone to see the baby?" As if it might heal something. But how could I look at her and not wonder if some part of her was mine? When the test came back, I knew. But still I went. Not for Evelyn. Not for Yvette. For her. Yvette handed me the baby without a word. I sat on the couch and held her. She was small, warm, quiet. But I didn't feel the epiphany I was waiting for. I saw Julian's betrayal. Evelyn's lies. I held her close, but it didn't rewrite the truth. "You're not her father," Yvette said quietly, as if she was trying to convince herself too. "You don't owe anything." I left without saying goodbye. That day I let go. Took the desk job. Traded the sea for city skylines. I let Lily in. She never pushed. Just listened. Waited for me to be ready. It's been 3 years since I walked out of that hospital. Evelyn and I haven't spoken since. Livia lives a life I'm not part of. And that's okay now. As for Julian, he got what was coming to him. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that hammer. Why I kept it. Why I finally let it go. Maybe it was never about revenge. Maybe I just needed to feel like something, anything, was still in my control. But the day I threw it into the sea, I felt something shift. A release. A farewell to the man I used to be.